fantastic.
I think they're frightening.
No, they're not.
Do you think he'll sing a note for me?
Why not? You're divine.
Welcome to the Temple of Abu Simbel. The facade is 84 feet long. Each of the statues of Ramses II is 65 feet high.
This is the main temple, the temple to Ramses at Abu Simbel. There is also a lesser temple to his wife, Nefertari, at the same location. As you can see, there are thousands of people here, and there are actually hundreds of police and army as well, and the governor of the province has showed up for this occasion. The temples are not at their original location due to the rising waters of Lake Nasser caused by the Aswan Dam. In the 1960s, they had to be moved to higher ground. This meant taking them apart block by block and rebuilding them correctly. That was a massive project of the 1960s. The reconstruction was so accurate that the light of dawn still reaches all the way down the hallway and illuminates 3 out of 4 statues. The one that it doesn't illuminate is Ptah, and the one in the middle is Ramses. But that only happens in February and October. Now these dates happen to coincide with traditional dates for Ramses' birthday and for his coronation date. However, we really don't have the foggiest idea what those dates really were, so we haven't the foggiest idea whether or not those dates happen to be accurate. Nevertheless, everyone here is eagerly waiting for dawn. Anticipating the crowd, I took this video the day before the main event so that we could see what the hall looks like with fewer people in it. The statues to be illuminated are behind that group of people sitting on the floor in the far back. This next scene is of the day of the celebration. In order to get near the front of the line on the day of the celebration, I had to wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning in order to get in line. And you can see that now the light is streaming down the hall, and it is illuminating the statues. So let's go take a look at them. Well, in case you missed them, this is the photograph that I took the day before when there weren't so many people and so much hurry to move everyone along. Ptah is on your left, and he stays in the dark. Ramses is in the middle of the other three gods, which are illuminated. Now the problem is to get out of the madhouse. Oh, by the way, the shadow on the wall is my camera on my tripod, which I held above everybody's head in order to get a relatively clear shot of the statues at dawn. Meanwhile, let's take a look at the walls of the temple, because the drawings and hieroglyphics that are on them actually tell us quite a bit about what was going on. It's, of course, Egyptian propaganda, though. In the first scene that I'm showing you, Ramses is quite large, and notice that his subjects are all quite small. Here we're not talking about the physical size as much as we are the spiritual size of the individuals. But when Ramses is depicted with the gods, he's the same size that they are. And of course, the reason for that is because he is also himself a god. Here, Ramses is presenting lotus flowers to a goddess. Lotus flowers usually indicates love. And behind him is his wife, Nefertari. She also has a lotus flower, and that other thing in her hand is a sistra, a musical instrument that she's playing. Notice that she is about the same size as Ramses, and the reason for that is because she herself is a goddess. That is not usual. Here again, Nefertari, Ramses, and the gods are all the same size, and Nefertari is still playing the sistra. And in this next one, she is once again the same size as the gods, but she is without Ramses, but she has two sistra in her hands. And it's the same thing when you go outside the temple of Nefertari. What you see is Nefertari is roughly the same size as Ramses. Now this is the classic smiting scene where the pharaoh is defeating all of his enemies. He has them by the hair and he's going to hit them with a battle mace. This is depicting Ramses carting off prisoners of war. And this particular drawing, this particular artwork, is on the southern side of the temple that faces Numidia, that is what is today Sudan. And so the prisoners that he's got are Numidians, that is, they are African. And you can tell that by looking at the faces, although they're a little bit distorted here. These next depictions are from the north side of the wall, and there they show the pharaoh defeating people that appear to be Middle Eastern. One of the ways that you can tell they're Middle Eastern is because they tend to have beards. Now, these men are prisoners of war from the Middle East. They may be Hittites, but it's hard to tell. The Pharaoh's army, of course, is always an important part of the depictions because they play basically supporting roles. The Pharaoh is always portrayed as being heroic, but he does have the army with him. Now, this wall has something very specific on it. It refers to the Battle of Kadesh. You see those circles that are on the wall. Those are the city walls, and inside are the buildings of Kadesh. And outside those circles, you see all kinds of soldiers and chariots and people dying and fighting and such. It's a little bit difficult to see, so I'm going to try to get you a better view of it through a drawing. This is a sketch of what is basically on the wall. It's a very complicated story, a very detailed story about the Battle of Kadesh, which Ramses claims he won, but that's somewhat in doubt because we also have the Hittite records as well, and both sides claim victory in this particular battle. This is the first one in which we have detailed evidence from both sides. Now we have a little bit of a problem. You see, I want to talk with you about the Battle of Kadesh. It's the world's most famous early battle. It's the first battle in which we have detailed information about precisely what happened from both sides, including a certain amount of the logistics. But I can't really explain Kadesh unless I explain a couple of 100 years of Egyptian history. The earliest Egyptian history that most people know about is the Old Kingdom. And it's in the Old Kingdom where the great pyramids were being built and where Khufu was building his pyramid and all that sort of thing. Incidentally, this is the hieroglyphic for Khufu. And that is Egypt's strongest point for a while. After that, it declines, it becomes weak. And as it becomes weak, some people from the Middle East, from the Tigris-Euphrates area, the Levant, come down into Egypt and they conquer half of Egypt, the northern half, of course, of Egypt. And those people, the Egyptians called the Hyksos. Well, it was a century or so, a couple of centuries, before the Egyptians were able to throw the Hyksos out of Egypt. Now, how did the Hyksos defeat the Egyptians to begin with? Well, the way they defeated the Egyptians was with chariots. The Egyptians believed in infantry. Chariots, for all practical purposes, are sort of the ancient version of tanks, and the Egyptians were not capable of standing up to them. The Hittite chariots were very heavy. They usually had 3 people on board, a driver, a weapons officer, and a shield bearer. So there's usually 3 people on a Hittite chariot. Egypt, once it had lost the northern half of Egypt, Egypt had to come up with its own chariots, which it did. They were lighter, faster, more mobile, more agile, but they only carried 2 people on them. There would be the driver and the weapons officer. Incidentally, the pharaoh had the ability to drive the chariot and to fight at the same time as this illustration depicts. In any event, the Egyptians caught up with the people in the Mideast on chariot technology. But the Egyptians never forgot the Hyksos. The first pharaohs to throw the Hyksos out usually have names that end in Mos. Ahmose is the first one. But maybe the most famous one is Tutmosis III. He pushed the Egyptian boundaries about as far up north as they had ever been. He conquered pretty much the entire eastern part of the Mediterranean coast. And that secured Egypt from having the danger of being invaded again for the most part. And it wasn't just Tutmosis III, it was Egyptian policy for hundreds of years. In fact, it was Egyptian policy to keep an army up there and keep vassal states in place. Well, eventually, a group called the Mitanni take advantage of the Egyptian weakness. And the Mitanni and the Egyptians eventually have some conflict. Now, while this is going on, the Mitanni have their own problems. They're being squeezed on one side by the Assyrians and on the other side by the Hittites. The Egyptian policy towards the Mitanni is quite friendly after they have some peace treaties, and Mitanni princesses come down into Egypt to marry the Egyptian pharaoh. Remember that because it becomes a staple of Egyptian policy, marriage alliances. In any event, the Mitanni are squeezed out by its difficult neighbors. And eventually what happens is that you find conflict between the Hatti, that is the Hittites, and the Egyptians over vassal states in what would now be Lebanon, basically, and Syria. Now we get to Pharaoh Akhennaten. He was the pharaoh that believed in something that looked a little bit like monotheism, and he called all of his soldiers back to go into Egypt and to clear out the remnants of the old religion to the extent that they could. The result of that was a power vacuum in the Middle East. Imagine Syria was in confusion, conflict, and chaos. During Akhenaten's time, the diplomacy was done by Akhenaten's mother, Tuya, and she didn't have an army to send up north. Eventually, the Egyptians come back after the time of Akhenaten. This is the time of King Tut. And a little bit after his time, there are a number of armies that go back up into the north to try to restore order. Next, we're going up to Hattusha to review some of the Hittite archives.
This is the royal palace at Hattusha. This is where the state archives were kept. And they were found here, in clay tablets about 100 years ago. A lot of the clay tablets tell us a great deal about what was going on. The Hittites had good relations with the Egyptians most of the time. And this happens to be a story about a messenger that came up from Egypt. And the messenger is from the Queen of Egypt. And the message is, "My husband is dead, and I have no son." People say that you have many sons, and that your sons are adult. If you send me one of your sons, he will become my husband, for it is repugnant to me to take one of my servants to my husband." Now, when the Hittite king learned this, he was a little bit concerned, and he gathered together his council, and he said, "Since the most ancient times, such a thing has never happened before." So he sent one of his people down to Egypt, and he told him, "Go bring me information worthy of belief. They may try to deceive me, and as to the possibility that they may have a prince, bring me back information worthy of belief." Well, a little while later, the messenger comes back from Egypt, and he says, the king says, "Perhaps they have a prince. They may be trying to deceive me and do not really want one of my sons to reign over them." But the Egyptian queen answered, and she said, "Why do you say they are trying to deceive me? If I had a son, should I write to a foreign country in a manner humiliating to me and my country? You do not believe me, and you even say so to me. He who was my husband is dead. I have no son. Should I then perhaps take one of my servants and make of him my husband? I have written to no other country. I have written only to you. They say that you have many sons. Give me one of your sons, and he will be my husband, and lord of the land of Egypt." So which Egyptian queen was this? Well, based on the time when the letters were written, it could very well be the wife of King Tut. King Tut died early, you recall. And the queen was very young. Now, King Tut was followed by the high priest, Ai. Ai was an old man, and the queen surely did not want to marry him. In fact, as soon as they were married, she disappears from history. No one knows what happened to her. Oh, and as far as the Hittite prince is concerned, he made it to the border of Egypt, and then he disappears too. There are lots of good stories in the Hittite texts. Because it's King Tut, he's followed by Ai, who was the old Grand Vizier. He's followed by Horemheb, and Horemheb is followed by Ramses the First. This is not Ramses the Great, it's his grandfather. And then Seti follows Ramses, that's Ramses the Great's father. Now when Ramses II comes into power, he has to prove himself. The Ramses, his grandfather and his father, were from a line of Egyptian generals. And so they really don't have the degree of legitimacy yet that they would like. Ramses, in order to prove that he's worthy, takes the army up north several times and attacks into the Hittites, who are attacking the Egyptians. And so there's this conflict going on. That brings us to the battle that I want to talk about, Kadesh. Ramses forms up 4 divisions: the Set division, the Ptah division, the Amun division, and the Ra division. Each one of these is named after Egyptian gods. And they head up north with the Amun division in the lead. And Ramses is with the Amun division. And they run across some Bedouin. Now these Bedouin happen to be in the pay of the Hattusians, the Hittites. And they tell Ramses that the Hittite king is afraid of Ramses and has his army 100 miles away, 150 miles away actually. Ramses believes that, and he establishes a camp across the river from Kadesh.
These are the 2 Bedouin that misled Ramses. You can find their images on the walls at Abu Simbel. Now, at that point, they pick up a couple of reconnaissance troops sent by the Hittite king. And they torture them, which is the way that interrogation normally occurs in ancient times. And the Hittite troops confess that the Hittite king is just behind Kadesh, waiting to attack. So there's an emergency council meeting, and they start preparing for the attack. But his army is still in march. He's only got one division on location and another division coming up, and it's strung out. And the Hittites form a strike force of chariots. They have about 2,500 chariots in their army. Ramses has about 2,000, but they're lighter and more agile. So it'll be a contest to see which ones work out best. The armies themselves, well, Ramses had about 20,000 troops, and the Hittites have nearly double that, 39,000. So the chariotry of the Hittite army breaks out of the woods, crosses the river, and attacks the Ra division, which is in progress headed up towards Kadesh. The shock effect of the Hittite chariotry disperses the Ra division. It's completely shattered at this point. And then they move up, the Hittite chariotry moves up to the camp where the Amun division is located. And the Amun division is crippled very, very badly. At this point, the Hittites lose control of their people. The Hittite charioteers dismount their chariots and they begin to start looting the Egyptian camp. This gives Ramses an opportunity to take his personal bodyguard and attack the Hittites, which they do quite successfully. In addition to that, there's a group unknown to the Hittites that appear in support of the Egyptian army. The Niraim are probably Moabites, but in any event, they come from one of the vassal states that the Egyptians have, and they descend on the Hittite chariotry, and it is badly crippled. The Ptah and Set divisions are still on the road trying to get up to the battlefield. What happened to the main body of the Hittite troops, the 39,000 that I talked to you about? They're still in place with the Hittite king. They never move into the battle. The Hittite chariotry had the opportunity to kill Ramses and secure the victory, but instead they fell to looting the camp. Well, at this point, neither one of them has won a clear victory. The Egyptians say that they won because they held the field after the battle was over. But then on the other hand, the Hittites still hold Kadesh. Now at this point, there are several different campaigns that occur, continuous fighting between the Hittites and Ramses. And the result of that is bad for both sides. It's draining both countries. And the Hittite queen, her name is Pudaheppa, writes to the Egyptian queen, Nefertari. Now, Nefertari sounds a little bit like Nefertiti, but it's a different person. Nefer means beautiful, so a lot of Egyptian women have Nefer in their names. Nefertari and Pudaheppa are writing back and forth, and what they're talking about is setting up a peace treaty. And it's the first peace treaty of which we have evidence from both sides and in roughly full text. As a matter of fact, the Egyptians put the peace treaty all over everything that they've got. And the Hittites make several copies as well, and we have copies of both of them. They don't tell exactly the same story. The Hittites say that they won, and the Egyptians say that they won the Battle of Kadesh. Nevertheless, the terms of the peace treaty are pretty similar.
In 1258 BCE, the Treaty of Kadesh was signed and included terms such as if a person of importance were to seek refuge in the other's territory, they had to be returned. The Treaty of Kadesh initiated a period of open trade relations between Egypt and the Hittites until the fall of the Hittite Empire in around 1200 BCE.
You remember what I said about the Mitanni? How the Egyptians solidified their peace treaty with marriage exchanges, and there were a bunch of Mitanni princesses that came down and married the Egyptian king. Well, the same thing happens with the Hittites. The first princess that came down to marry Ramses from Hittite land, we have 6 copies of the wedding announcement. And the second princess that he marries, well, we have a couple of copies of that announcement. So it's Egyptian policy to solidify the peace treaty with a marriage alliance. This is the wedding announcement at Abu Simbel. It's right in front of the main temple, the Ramses temple. And at the top of it, you see Ramses. He's a little hard to make out due to weathering. To your right now, you see the bride. This is the daughter of Ptah. And the father of the bride is behind her. He is the king of the Hittites. And you can tell that because of the hat that he's wearing. This next photo actually comes from Hattusha, but it's the Hittite army, and notice the hats are very similar to the one that was worn by the king on the marriage stele. Incidentally, Ptah is probably one of the world's most powerful women that was ever in government. She was in charge of religion at Hattusha. It also did substantial foreign policy, and she decided judicial litigation. This is a letter to Ptah in cuneiform, which is the language of foreign diplomacy. We have 15 letters from the Egyptians received by Ptah at Hattusha. One, at least, was from Nefertari, and one was from Ramses' mother. She was, for all practical purposes, the Iron Lady of the Bronze Age.